Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles. And as you could all see, I am not in my normal studio today. I'm in a winter wonderland. We are having a blizzard of blizzards in the Northeast. I'm not in Wyoming, although it looks like it, in New England. We are getting walloped pretty good over the last 30 days. I know the visual may not be quite as crisp as in the past, but hey, we're giving into the elements a little bit. And more importantly, you're not here to see my face, I don't think. You're here for the amazing rigor and intellectual resources that my guest bring to the table. So today, and the juxtaposition, although I guess we're both wearing black, is I'm not in Dubai, obviously, but Jimmy, our special guest, is. We're going to call this Why the World's Wealthiest Families Choose, sometimes, Dubai over London, New York, Zurich. It features Jimmy Sexton, LL.M, founder and CEO of Esquire Group. Jimmy, it's great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Angelo. Yeah, we're in definitely two different environments. I was in shorts and a t-shirt all day outside with the air conditioning blasting at home. Quite different from your environment.
Indeed, although in the summertime, I may be the one who gets a little bit of the last laugh come July and August, but you got 6 months to go to still laugh at me from that one. We shall see.
Well, I leave for the summer.
Let us surprise. Let us begin. So what I'm going to call the migration paradox, and some would say it might be an uncomfortable question. Why are wealthy, successful people leaving countries they were born in, that they built their wealth and they had the opportunities to do so? Why are they building these fortunes and moving to a place, well, to some degree, in Dubai, like didn't really exist, at least not in the way that we know it 50 years ago? What are you seeing that maybe the average person, the average, even wealthy, successful entrepreneur isn't?
Well, look, I mean, I think that one of the things that I always like to say is capital is always going to go where it's welcome, right? And I think that there's fewer and fewer countries in the world that are really rewarding wealth, rewarding success, providing environments where wealth can be built, but also still celebrating wealth and success, right? I think in a lot of the Western world, I think that being wealthy is almost being punished, right? You're being vilified, tax the rich. The rich are the ones, causing all of the environmental problems with private jets, and I mean, just trying to really tax the wealthy to death to pay for everything, and it just doesn't work that way. And what's interesting is, a lot of the wealthy people that I know, it's not just about taxes, right? I mean, obviously taxes plays a role in it, but it's also just about safety, right? I mean, like when I go to London, for example, with my friends in the summer, I mean, it's like, okay, watches, jewelry, nice shoes, anything that might have a brand name on it, this stays at home in the safe. And I think that most major European capital cities are like that. I know in a while in places like Beverly Hills, there was a problem with home invasions and things like that, or getting your car keyed or something like that. And you just don't have those issues in Dubai, right? I think that there's a lot of places, I think it's not just, obviously I think Dubai has taken a center stage, but I think you're also seeing more migration to places like Switzerland and maybe even Monaco, but places where people feel safe and feel like they're not being punished for their success and wealth.
And I guess that relates to my next question, the why now. And I believe that relates to what you just described with crime, with rising taxes in places like the UK and London, and here in the US with introducing in California of what we define as the wealth tax. Now, it still has to pass. Even Newsom is not in favor of it, shockingly. Ro Khanna and definitely others are. And it shows trends that are happening here in the US. Oh, it's just one time, it's just 5%, it's just billionaires. We know that's not true in terms of it happens once, it'll start to happen again. Billionaires will leave, it will trickle down. And let us surprise, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts will probably follow suit. It starts a trend of something that is going to be negative. So the why now, I'm probably answering my own question. You could feel free to add to it. But the more direct question is what really changed in the last, forget 50 years, 5 years, that accelerated the wealth migration to Dubai, as if my question didn't effectively bring up exactly why.
Well, I'll tell you something really interesting, and this a couple comments on this, but look, I think as you well put it, right, as we say, it's a one-time thing, then it becomes a multiple-time thing. I mean, look, I think when the income tax was first became law in the United States, it applied to the top 1% of people, and now it applies across the board. And I think even when you looked at this billionaire tax that was proposed on the federal level, which obviously didn't pass, I think it actually applied to everybody with a net worth of over 100 million, right? So not even billionaires, right? So I think all of these taxes start out as a one-time thing. Then it becomes sort of a consistent thing. And then obviously the threshold for applicability starts to go down it applies to a wider net of people. What I think happened in Dubai is quite interesting. I mean, I've been here going on 11 years now. And, in the run up to COVID, I was actually seeing Dubai a little bit, in my view, a little bit on the decline a little bit, right? Like rents were going down, property values were going down, and when COVID hit, I remember a lot of the logistics companies were actually filled up with people trying to leave Dubai, and I really thought to myself, "Ooh, how is this really going to impact Dubai long term?" But I think Dubai handled things so well that it really attracted a lot of people to come here, right? I mean, Dubai completely locked down for a while. They started opening up their borders again, I believe in July 2020, and they never shut back down again, right? And the freedom that you had here, the freedom of movement in terms of restaurants being open, gyms being open, everything was steadily increasing, not like Europe and a lot of other countries where it was kind of going like, okay, summer, everything's going to be fine, and then winter, we're going to lock down again. But what I really think happened was I think that there was two things, and I think they happened during COVID that really put Dubai center stage, and that was I think that a lot of the wealthy people saw all of these, if you want to call them bailouts or financial assistance that were being offered by the governments, like PPP or in the US or similar programs in other countries, and handouts to people. And I think there were a lot of wealthy people were sitting there looking at this going, well, somebody's going to have to pay for this, right? And it's not that the governments are going to get more fiscally responsible and figure out a way to cut certain services or something to pay this back. No, taxes are going to go up. Where are we going to go? And I think a lot of them then started looking at Dubai and saying, look, here in Europe, we keep going through these waves of being locked down, not being locked down. They want to make vaccinations mandatory. They want to do all this. Dubai seems to be offering the most amount of freedom right now. It's geographically, I mean, unless you're in the US, pretty centrally located. It's safe. You have good medical care. You have, all sorts of dining and entertainment and everything else. And of course, tax advantage living. And I think that a lot of people have just started seeing during COVID that, fiscally, it just wasn't going to work out in these other countries without dramatically raising taxes. And, when taxes get raised, who do governments raise it on? The wealthy and companies. And I think, Hong Kong with kind of, the bigger influence in China and the expense of Singapore, and also Singapore doesn't always make it so easy to become a resident and so on and so forth. I think Dubai just positioned itself and did everything right to attract the wealth and business.
And Jimmy, you sound American, at least by birth. Are you from the USA?
I'm from California originally,
Okay. And when
but
did you decide to be
but
somewhat
not
of a global citizen?
well. I mean, I grew up pretty fortunate, right? I grew up between California and Austria, and so I kind of split my life between Europe and the United States, and I was lucky enough to have traveled quite a bit as a kid. So I was always kind of felt like a global citizen, and I remember, I mean, my sort of journey to Dubai was interesting. I was invited here for. I was already not spending so much time in the U.S. and I was thinking of, I wanted to relocate somewhere and I just wasn't sure where that place was going to be. And I got invited to a New Year's party in Dubai in December of 2014, and I was here for a week and I was like, this is it. This is where I'm moving. And I came back a few months later and set up a company and started, looking at places to live and getting my residency. And I've been here ever since, and I love it more every day.
And yes, audience, we're going to get to things like residency and citizenship. And I understand for my USA citizens and green card holders, you're tied into the US tax system all over the world. So we could
Yep.
state that this is a little bit more for my global audience. Jimmy mentioned uh, Austria, which is the one of the last European countries I visited. I really enjoy Vienna, so kudos there. We do try to take a global perspective. It's not all about the USA, although I do love the USA, and we'll go a little back and forth with Jimmy on some things to that coming up relatively shortly. And by the way, even though you may not get the tax advantages as a USA citizen, having residencies and business opportunities around the world, that still does not mean you should not do it for a variety of purposes. And depending on our time today, all things that we're going to have a chance to dive into with Jimmy. So you've lived in Dubai specifically for about a decade, and you did mention some changes kind of post COVID. How has the city changed, and importantly, its position in the global wealth landscape? How has it evolved?
Look, I think Dubai is one of the few places where you see what's possible when a government really operates like a business, right? I mean, this is something where you really kind of get the feeling that it's Dubai Inc. and they understand that to get residents and to get businesses, they need to continually improve the lives of those that are already here and um, to continue to make it a more attractive place for people to come, right? So I think that they've created new residency options. They've obviously creative, attractive business laws. They invest. There's a lot of money available for businesses that are moving here or startups that want to start here, and they're just continually innovating. Right? I mean, this is the only place where I've ever lived where I've actually gotten an email from the government asking, like, "Hey, is our websites fast enough? Are they easy enough to understand? How can we improve, right?" And so I think, every year that I've lived here, even simple things like, a visa renewal process or, setting up a company or renewing a company or something, everything just continually gets easier and more efficient. And, one of the things that they've done is they're actually, and I know that you talk a lot about AI, it's the only country that I've ever heard of doing this, is they're actually applying AI to their laws and regulations with the specific purpose of how can we make this more efficient? Are there laws that aren't working? Are there laws that can be combined? Are there laws that can be approved? Are there laws that should be deleted? And they're actually having or building. I don't know if it's running yet or not. I think it was announced last year, but they're actually going to be running an AI on basically the legal system on how can we make it better? How can we make it more attractive? How can we make it more efficient? What laws should we get rid of? Which new ones should we make? Whereas in most countries, right, like the regulation and everything just keeps stacking up. Everything gets more complicated and more expensive. And I think that I think that Dubai is just doing everything they can to make it a nice place to live in and an attractive place to live in, an attractive place to do business. And going to what you were saying about Americans sort of being tied into the U.S. tax net, you're absolutely correct. And for the majority of my time in Dubai, you hadn't seen a ton of Americans, like maybe some employees that come, they work for a company, but not a lot of entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And now that's changing because they're coming here regardless of the taxes, just because of the opportunity.
That's an excellent point. So I did have a question in my mind relative to how Dubai is competing for residents that at least partially I think you answered. And how does it actually play through in reality and practice? I'm going to slightly adapt the question a little bit in terms of governments competing for people. Most governments completely, it feels like the opposite. There's a sense of entitlement to their citizens that is unique to Dubai, doing things that are attractive to them. And a little bit like hiring a great employee. It's not just having them come on board, it's how do I make them happy and they stay. And that Dubai is, I guess, doing wonderfully.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something that I've never seen before. I think, like you were saying a little bit with the entitlement, right? I mean, in every other country, where I've lived or been, it's always kind of like, oh, you know what, you're lucky to be here. You got to jump through these hoops, and absolutely no real desire to make your life easier or better, right? It's just kind of this is the way it is. Deal with it, and that's definitely not the case. I mean, you even see things, for example, like when I first moved here, for example, the work week, like it is in most of the Middle East, was Sunday through Thursday, right? And then Friday was the big, religious day of the week, and Saturday was sort of your Sunday. And they changed that to Monday through Friday because they wanted to be more on par with the rest of the world as a financial center, and to make that align with what the rest of the world is doing. So there's the improvements are even really fundamental to things like what's the work week that's going to be the best to be a global city and align with the rest of the world. And I mean, in terms of talking about competing for residents, I think one of the things that Dubai has been done very well. I mean, look, there's several countries where you can sort of get, let's call it tax advantage living, right? Like Switzerland is one, you can negotiate a flat tax. Italy has a flat tax. Some of these countries have a flat tax. Or even if you look at some place like Singapore, like the residency process is not always super straightforward, right? And in some places like Singapore, there's a lot of discretion involved. Whereas in the UAE, it's very, very clearly set out how you become a resident, right? And you fulfill those requirements, you get your residency. And there's not really, I'll use Switzerland as another example, right? If you're an EU citizen, it's fairly easy to go to Switzerland and get a residency. If you're an American, it's very, very difficult. Whereas in Dubai, if you're American, if you're German, if you're Indian, if you're Malaysian, the process is going to be the same for everybody, and everybody's treated equally in that sense. And it's very clear in black and white what requirements you need to fulfill to become a resident. And I think that certainty, bodes very well for them.
I'm going to go with let's kill some bad advice right now. What's the number one myth about Dubai that gets people in trouble?
I think the number one myth that gets people in trouble with Dubai is I think that there's very much a belief that if you have Dubai residency or UAE residence, better said, that you don't have to pay taxes anywhere else, right? So a lot of people think you get your UAE residency, and then you can live in the UK, or you can live in Germany, or you can live wherever you come to the UAE every now and then. And because you have the residency, you don't have to pay tax in that other country, which is not the case, right? Because there's a difference between legal residency, which is the right to live somewhere, and tax residency, right? Because if you have legal residence here in the UAE, and even if you fulfill the UAE's requirements for being a tax resident, that doesn't mean that someplace like the UK is going to care, right? Because the UK has their own residency rules, and they're going to look at it and say, well, we don't care that Dubai says you're a tax resident or you have legal residency there. You're also a tax resident here, and we're going to tax you. And so I think for me, this is the biggest myth, that you can kind of just get Dubai residency, open a bank account here, send, have money sent here, and you're all of a sudden not taxed anywhere else. I think a lot of people don't understand this difference, that, each country has their own set of residency rules, and they're always going to look at it from their perspective, and they don't really care about how other countries like the UAE, for example, classify it.
Walk us through the difference between UAE residency and tax residency, and how people do a hell of a job screwing this up.
Yep. So look, you have legal residency, which is the right to reside in the UAE, right? Kind of like a visa in the United States or something like that. It gives you the right to reside here. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a tax resident here. And to become a tax resident here, it used to be. I heard they just changed it. I haven't confirmed that this is the case yet. But so for many years, it was you needed to spend more than 183 days here, or 183 days or more here to be a tax resident. They changed it, and for the last few years, it's been you had to spend 90 days in order to get the tax residency certificate. And I heard they're going back to the 183 or more, but I haven't confirmed that that's actually taken place yet. And the big difference is, if you're a tax resident here, that gives you the ability, for example, if you were to be a tax resident in Germany and decide, I'm going to become a UAE resident. If you don't become a tax resident here when you leave Germany, Germany's likely to say, well, you're not tax resident anyway, so we're just going to consider you continually tax resident in Germany, for example. Whereas, if you're able to show you resettled here and so on and so forth. But that being said, even being a tax resident in Dubai doesn't necessarily mean that you can't also be a tax resident somewhere else and be a dual tax resident, right? So there's a possibility that you could be a legal and tax resident of the UAE, but also a tax resident of the UK. And in that case, the UK is going to say, well, you meet our residency requirements for residency, we're going to tax you anyway. So it's very important, if you're going to move to the UAE, that you not only get legal residency, but that you also make sure you become a tax resident here, and also that you terminate the tax residency in whatever country you're leaving, so you're not in their tax net anymore.
You mentioned the UK several times. To me, grave challenges for a variety of reasons in the UK.
Yeah.
And very obvious, a lot of their very rich people that often are wealth creators, create companies, spend within the system, and provide value not only to the tax base. Just look, here in America, the top 10% of people pay 93% of the taxes, and how the media, and to me, the left spins that is just like shocking. And we may get to a little bit of the rise of socialism here and challenges for America. We'll see our time frame. But the UK is picking up on the fact of, hey, what this guy Angelo is saying here is actually very right. But as opposed to changing those guidelines to be more accommodating and attractive to wealthy people, they're hardcore cracking down, as you hinted. They're taking anything to go after their people. They almost sound like here in the US, the IRS. They're starting to follow a little bit of our guidelines, following you around the world. You already hinted how to potentially properly address that. But if you could maybe either restate that and note that countries like that, maybe the UK, France, etc., are going to be more aggressive, holding on to their citizens from a tax perspective. And who knows, Jimmy, maybe in 5 or 10 years, they won't allow people to leave. Maybe you better make that move now.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. I'm going to get into that answer, but one of the things, because you were saying something like the top 10% of Americans paying whatever percentage of the tax. I read a Wall Street Journal article the other day that said that 40% of Americans pay zero income taxes at all.
Correct.
Right. So I mean, that's an astounding amount. So look, I mean, I think that most of Europe, and I would include, I'll even include the US and Canada in this, and maybe even Australia to a certain degree. But look, I think, and I mean, this is sort of an unpopular political view of mine with some people, which is, look, the problem that you have, right, is to get, I mean, being elected is a popularity contest, right? You need to get the masses to vote. And the masses are never going to vote for shouldering more of the tax burden themselves, right? They're always going to try to push this on to companies that can't vote at all, or onto the wealthy who are a minority, and don't have the sway to influence the tax law, right? And I mean, who's not going to vote for more free services and stuff like that they don't have to pay for? So I think that a lot of these socialist countries have a very big problem in that, the politicians can't get elected on a platform other than, hey, we're going to provide more free services, more benefits, and then they have to go out and try to find a way to pay for this, which is going after companies and the wealthy. But at the same time, that's also killing their economies, because, as you said, the wealth creators
Exactly.
and everybody is leaving, right? You have a big brain drain, the companies are leaving, everything's leaving. What I think that we will see, and we've seen more and more, right? I mean, there's a lot of countries have instituted exit taxes now. I think the UK was thinking about one. I don't think it passed, but I know that exit taxes are becoming more and more popular. But look, I think some people, and I've seen this happen with several people from Europe, which is, yeah, I'm going to have to pay an exit tax, but I better pay this exit tax, to your point, now, and get out, so that I'm not stuck here, and I have the ability. I'm better off paying this as exit tax now when my net worth is X, rather than in 10 years when it's even more, right? So a lot of people are looking at it as an expense that they need to sort of bear now to save themselves in the future. And what we are seeing in Europe, I don't think it's passed anywhere yet, but I believe that there's a lot of countries that have been considering it. So obviously, as you mentioned a couple of times already, the U.S., if you want to get out of the tax system, you got to expatriate, right? You got to give up your U.S. citizenship or your green card, right?
And pay a tax, an exit tax, so to speak.
I mean, it depends on your situation, but let's just say if you're a wealthy individual, you're paying an exit tax, right? But that's the only way out. Otherwise, you have a leash on you forever with taxes. What we've seen proposed in France, I think Germany had a proposal, which is basically not necessarily a complete citizenship-based taxation, where they're saying we're taxing all citizens on their worldwide income. But what they've said is, hey, if you're gonna leave France, we're not only going to charge you an exit tax, but we're going to continue to tax you as a French resident for the next 10 years, right? So I don't think we're going to see a shift where other countries are doing a pure citizenship-based taxation like the US, but I do think we're going to start seeing more and more of a shift towards exit taxes and basically like a 10-year leash where you're still stuck with paying income taxes as if you were a resident to try to keep people from leaving.
I mean, again, Jimmy, this year, as you know, I've covered some of this subject with David Lesparance, Philip Marcovici, and others that we had a little bit of a sparky debate on, which was fun. And I don't want to keep on pounding this. And I understand, everyone, I come from like effectively the poorest of the poor backgrounds. And I've had success and I've had failures in my life, even into my adulthood. For me, I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit. I always wanted to be great. And sadly, I often fell short. But it was something that I strived for. I didn't play the victimhood card. When you start to tax people to death and it demotivates them, and they take, again, that brain drain that you noted. In the US, we at least have some state optionality. So states like California, New York, Massachusetts, they're losing out to Florida and Texas. Like that is not a net positive for California, Massachusetts, all the obvious states that I could mention that are poorly run, poor infrastructure, lots of crime, and you're having the people that are paying the taxes and that have the intelligence to create companies that employ people and support communities, and they're moving. How is that a positive? Where is the money going to come from to give people things for free? Where? Is it going to be printed at the federal level? And is that good long term for the US government? Obviously, I think we all know the answer to that. So, socialism is obviously on the rise. It happened in Europe 10, 15, I could argue 20 years ago, and it appears to be trending here in the US. So I don't know if we want to make it a political or a Western tax discussion from that perspective, but I'm going to, given that you were born in America, you have experiences around the world from Europe to Asia to obviously the Middle East, your perspective of what you're seeing in terms of trends.
Yeah. So look, I mean, what I'm seeing is as far as trends, I think you're seeing a lot of wealth leave Europe. I think you have some people with let's say within Europe that are opting to stay in Europe, but to go to flat tax regimes. Like, Greece has their 100,000 euro flat tax. Italy, I think, is now 300,000.
Right.
Switzerland, you can negotiate it. Malta and Cyprus have non-dom regimes. Monaco is obviously has their tax regime, as does Andorra. And then you have places obviously like Dubai, which I think is really the hotspot. Hong Kong still is around as in Singapore, and then you have a lot of places in South America, Uruguay, Costa Rica, places like that. But I think what we're seeing in terms of trends is that the wealthy are voting with their feet, right? I mean, I think the wealthy are just looking at the situation, as you much said, and I think as you said, the math just doesn't work on socialism, right? Like, the math just doesn't work. And the only people that the governments can get money from are the people that have money. And the sad part about it is, if you're a business and you run it poorly, you go out of business. The governments are so fiscally irresponsible, and their only solution is to go take money from people who have actually not gone bankrupt, right? That have run a business or invested successfully. And the only way that, let's call it, Western democracies are going to get out of this is that they're going to have to get tough, right? They're going to need to say, we're overspending, we're fiscally irresponsible, we need to redesign the system. And I think that, this is a very political statement, but I think that it's a very, I'll use the US as an example. A lot of people aren't going to like this, but I think it's absolutely ridiculous that these 40% that aren't paying any income taxes get to vote. What? I mean, that's like, if you have no skin in the game, why do you get a say? That's like, if you have a company with shareholders, that non-shareholders also get to vote. Why? Right? So, I mean, I think that in all these countries, unless you're, paying, if you're net paying into the system, I think that we would see things look much, much differently. Now, what you have in the US that I think is a little different than the rest of the world is, I think the US still has an ability to innovate, and a positive and an access to capital like you have nowhere else in the world, right?
Of course.
Like, if you even want to set up a company in Europe, right? It's going to take you months to do. You got to go through all this, know your customer stuff with the lawyers.
It may take you 5 minutes in the US.
It takes you 5 minutes in the US, and I think the other big thing that I've always noticed, having grown up between Europe and the US, you could go out to dinner with a group of Americans sitting around a table, with, not really knowing any of them that well, and you could just start talking about business and say, hey, I have this business idea. And everybody else at the table, if they have an ability to help, they're going to be like, oh, I know this guy you got to talk to. Oh, that's a great idea. What about this? There's just this this thing in the US that people want to help and want to see success. Whereas in Europe, if you say, oh, I have this idea, everybody's going to be like, oh, that's a horrible idea. That's not going to work. Right. And so I think this positivity towards business, the speed at which business can happen, the access to capital and the innovation and the tolerance of risk in the US, that, even though the tax system isn't the greatest, I think that still is going to give the US always a leg up on most other countries, because they still provide a tremendous platform to build wealth that I don't know another country. I think Dubai comes very close to it, and is doing a great job at doing that. But if you compare it to Europe or anywhere else in the world, there's just no place like it.
There is no doubt about that. And my audience has heard me mention that many times. And there are other factors relative to contract law, our constitution, military strength. Most of the world effectively still settles in dollars. There are huge advantages. Our underlying resources, our farmland, water, there's our strategic position in the world, literally in terms of geography. There's massive advantages to the US. So some of the civil and social unrest, some of the bifurcation we're seeing happening, the taxes will definitely all be some of the negative relative to that. And you may disagree with me on my next comment, but where the US differs from a lot of Western and even Western, but other countries, is we do, unlike the UK, have freedom of speech. Now, I get it. I can't go into a movie theater and yell fire when there's not a fire. So, and I can't say certain things relative to, I wouldn't use the word hate, but threatening to, let's go with the word eliminate someone. But we have freedom of speech for now. If we maintain that here in the US, that other parts of the world, I could state, even where you are now, you don't quite have that level of freedoms. Where am I wrong, or do you agree?
Well, I mean, look, I think if you look, I mean, even if you look at Europe, I think, for example, right? I mean, they're very much trying to police online speech. They're threatening XAI, or Elon Musk's thing. So I think that you are in a lot of the world. I think that you're seeing in a lot of the world, sort of, this in some places an attempt, in other places flat out censorship. I think one of the things that you see, and look, to be honest with you, I don't necessarily have what I have an issue with is hypocrisy, right? I have no problem with censorship if you know that this is the rules there, right? And that's just the way it is. What I don't like is places like Europe where you go in and they say, oh, we have freedom of speech, we have this, but then you actually look at it and you don't really, right? It's kind of false advertising. And I think that, look, I think in the US, you do have a very high level of freedom of speech. I think there still is a very high level of freedom of press. I think the problem is, most of the press is now not so independent anymore. So you have the ability to have freedom of the press, but in practice, a lot of it's very partisan these days. But look, and I think, I think that the U.S. a lot of times, when you look at things internally, right? I think in the end, the courts usually decide it correctly, right? I think a lot of times, not always, but I think a lot of times in the U.S. you have a state that tries to pass a law, the federal government that tries to pass a law or does something, and it grinds its way through the wheels of justice, and it isn't always great, but at the end, I think the courts normally wind up making the right decision in the U.S. I think the judicial system in the U.S. For the most part, has functioned pretty well.
Excellent. Uh, Man, I have so many questions. So why don't I'll begin to buzz through them a little bit quicker. Uh, we did hint at this one earlier. Why would an American citizen or green card holder subject globally to US taxation, even if they spend every day in Dubai, United Arab Emirates? But still, there are still going to be reasons. So you're talking to someone who's near complete on a rewrite of a 700-page handbook called Sovereign Risk and Disaster Preparedness, understanding history, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, that empires do decay, things change. Now, AI could be interesting in how the world is going to be evolving in many different perspectives right now. But that being said, having optionality, even if I don't get tax arbitrage advantage at the moment, why would I still want to maybe maintain business, banking, residency, resources, relationships all around the world, including the United Arab Emirates, assuming they have the interest and the resources to do so?
So look, I think, look, I think that you have a lot of, I think that the UAE, like I said, has a lot to offer, right? I mean, this is one of the few places where you're not vilified for having money or being wealthy, where people are still very positive about doing business and want to do business. The government is very pro-business. And again, sort of back to the thing that, you have a country that's continually trying to improve itself, continually trying to make it more attractive to businesses, make it more attractive to residents. You have you don't need to worry about getting, your McLaren keyed in Dubai, no matter where you go. You don't need to worry about having a watch stolen on the street. When my girlfriend goes out at night, if she's carrying a nice bag, wearing some nice jewelry or something, and she's walking down the street at 1 in the morning, I don't even need to think about that, right? Like it's just not a concern. You have good medical care, you have good education. But one of the interesting things, and I think the UAE is the only country that I know of that does this for its residents, right? So you have different categories of residency here. The highest being what they call the golden visa, which is essentially kind of like a green card. It's a 10-year visa. And with the golden visa, and I mean this was just announced, that you're essentially entitled to the same consular services as UAE citizens, right? So if there's an emergency as a golden visa holder, I'm entitled to the same evacuation and consular services as a UAE citizen, which is a very attractive thing, right? I mean, a lot of countries will say, yeah, okay, you have legal residency here, which means legally you have a right to go there, but you might not necessarily, in the event of COVID or something like this, you're not going to most likely get those consular services and have the ability to be transported back there and have government support to get home. And that's something that you do get in the UAE, which is something unique to the UAE as far as I know. And something that, especially like you were saying, in a crisis or something like that, I think is something that's very, very valuable.
If I have it correct, the UAE introduced corporate tax in maybe it was 2023. Is it 9% on profits
Yeah.
above 100K? Did that change
So
the calculus?
it's interesting. It has not. I kind of was wondering how that was going to play out, but it has not. So first of all, it's tax on profits above 100K. Through the end of this year, we've had a small business exception that if your revenues were under $1 million, it's about, I think it's right around $1 million, that you're exempt from the 9% corporate income tax. But there's also a lot of, they've made a lot of attractive exemptions and stuff like that, right? So if you structure it properly within like a family trust or a family foundation, and you have a family office or something, right? Basically, any passive income is going to be exempt from that 9% if you structure it properly, right? So, rents, royalties, dividends, capital gains, stuff like that is all going to be exempt from the 9%. So essentially, the way that they've structured this 9% income tax, it really only applies to sort of active trading income or active business income, right? So, passive income is if it's structured properly, they've created ways where you can essentially opt out of the 9% tax on passive income, which is obviously super attractive.
Obviously, for someone doing this right, not a tourist playing like a resident, what does a proper Dubai structure look like? You could get a little deep into DIFC, ADGM foundations, UAE companies, offshore holdings. Why don't we go a little deep on this one? Because my audience is going to be interested, and a lot of them are looking at kind of global citizenship. They own multiple companies, family office structures, and we do have to get this one right.
Yep, absolutely. So look, I mean, we have trust and foundation laws in ADGM and in DIFC. There's also a foundation law in RAC ICC and Ras Al Khaimah. There's a few other free zones that also have a family office, a single family office structure available. So in my opinion, the most proper structure here is to have a family foundation, right? So private foundation sort of at the top of all this thing. And when we talk about, foundations, we're not talking about a charitable foundation like, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? We're talking about a foundation that acts more like a trust, right? So you have kind of a founder that sets it up, much like the settler of a trust. Rather than a trustee, you have a board of counselors, and then you have the beneficiaries. So if you have this properly structured foundation, and then you have your family office structure in it, you maybe have a holding company in it, and you have investments underneath that, having that foundation, if it qualifies as a family foundation, which basically only means that the beneficiaries need to be identifiable, right? So this is either they're in there by name or my children or my bloodline, just that they could be defined individuals. Then this family foundation is what gives, because a foundation is taxed in the UAE as a company, right? So also subject to the 9%. But you can make an election for it to be tax transparent, right? So basically, it's no longer a taxable entity. And that means that in the UAE, at least, as long as the income wouldn't be taxed to an individual, then there's no tax on it, right? So this is kind of how you opt out of the corporate tax on passive income. Now, the interesting thing is all the wholly owned subsidiaries of that company, of that foundation, qualify for this tax transparent status, right? So if I have a foundation that qualifies as a family foundation and is tax transparent, that means I can elect for my family office to be tax transparent that's earning passive income, and any other company that I own that's earning passive income, I can basically opt out of the corporate tax on that, right? And the foundation is what makes that possible. And so for me, it's always a foundation on top that qualifies as a family foundation, and then we put the structures underneath it, right? And if any sort of SPVs or companies that are earning passive income, we would want to opt out of the corporate tax using this tax transparency election. And any sort of active businesses that are earning trading income, we would not make that election, and they'll pay the 9% corporate income tax. But to me, that's really the ideal structure. Obviously, depending on where you're going to be located and what your goals are, there's some decisions to be made between ADGM and DIFC. Right. But in general, that's for me the ideal structure when in the UAE.
You would think people of success have the resources, are going to hire the right talent, but nonetheless, I've seen it over my decades. A lot of them don't, or they don't adapt. So reverse engineering the question, what's the worst UAE Dubai structure that you've seen someone attempt, and kind of what went wrong, and could it be corrected, or is it too late?
Look, I think a lot of times there's two sort of questions to this, right? If you're an American, for example, when you restructure something outside of the U.S., like in the UAE, there's potentially U.S. tax consequences to that, right? So you can fix it from a UAE standpoint, probably fairly inexpensively from a tax standpoint, but it might be very costly from a U.S. tax standpoint. Now, if you're not American and you live here and you're from somewhere else and you're tax resident here, and the only thing you got to worry about is UAE tax, we can definitely fix, structures that weren't done properly, right? Now, we're not going to be able to fix it for the past, but we'll be able to fix it for the future. And I think the biggest mistake that I've seen is that most people don't know about the benefits that this foundation provides, that basically the foundation and all the subsidiaries earning passive income can essentially opt out of the 9% tax. And so you see a lot of people not go through that step of setting up the foundation, and they just set up, companies, and then they have this 9% tax leakage, right? I just dealing with a situation where the client is selling something, and the gain's going to be, in the 3-digit millions. When I came into the situation, I looked at it and I was like, well, why do you guys own all this stuff personally? You're going to be paying 9% tax for nothing. Let's restructure this. So I think that there's just a lot of people that, like you said, they don't hire the right advisors, or they try to, they listen to what and I'm sure you've seen this a lot, they listen to what their buddy said, and they go set something up, and it just doesn't work out well.
There is a question that came in that I'm going to quickly comment on, then Jimmy will as well. The person notes, I chose London. UAE is hotter and way more expensive for what it is. Again, I'm not the expert, although I consider myself somewhat of a global traveler and citizen. And I know some of you think that I really hate on the UK, and to some degree, you're right, for good reason. So you mentioned the UAE is hot. It's really hot during certain months of the year. And the weather where you are in London, I don't find that attractive really much of any time of the year. Also, do taxes matter to you? Lifestyle, of course, all of those, safety, overreach by government. Now, after saying all that, which is a little bit crapping on your comment, here's what I will say to your benefit. If living in the UK makes you happy and you're willing to pay more taxes for maybe it's family and happiness, then kudos to you. Then I agree with you. You don't want to let the tail wag the dog per se. Jimmy, what would you say to him?
Yeah, look, I always think, obviously, there's other considerations other than tax and things like that. Everybody has their own priorities, right? And I think that that's really how you need to select where you're going to live. The thing that bothers me, and I always look at the trends of countries as well, right? When I look at the UK, we've seen how far that they've gone from having a non-dom regime to where they are now. In terms of tax unfriendly, and you see the writing on the wall where it's going, right? It's just like, you don't want to invest in a company that you see going bankrupt. You want to invest in a company that you see making money, right? So me personally, I don't want to put down roots or rely on a country that I see making decisions that are going to harm me down the road. And I want to, put myself and my wealth in a country that I see making decisions that are going to benefit me down the road. And the way I see the world now, I don't see that being the UK, and I don't see that being most places in Europe.
Single family offices, now we're really getting into my lifeblood, what makes me excited, have exploded broadly in being created and ran out of United Arab Emirates and Dubai. And you mentioned certain reasons, tax advantages. You didn't mention the level of talent and resources there. A little bit like a Singapore is generally very attractive and good. Some would say safety and lifestyle. So if single family offices have exploded in greater United Arab Emirates, maybe besides or adding on to my comments, why? And at what threshold of wealth does a single family office structure from your perspective make sense in the United Arab Emirates?
Well, look, I think because now we're getting into something that I'm also a little pretty passionate about, right? Like when I first started in this business 20 some odd years ago, a family office meant that, you had in-house legal, you had in-house accounting, you had somebody that was handling travel and property management and all kinds of different stuff. It was a full service, thing for the family. And I think that the term family office has gotten very diluted where everybody that has 5 million bucks and a private banker says that they're a family office, right? So in my view, no single family office makes sense. I mean, at a bare minimum 50 million. I'm probably more at the 100 million stage because I mean, look, I like to see things done right. And I think to run any sort of family office, it needs to be planned properly, it needs to be staffed properly, and it needs to have the resources it needs. And I think anywhere where you do it in the world, I'm not just talking about the UAE, there has to be sufficient wealth there and sufficient returns being generated to be able to provide enough revenue to pay the cost to run the family office properly, and still make a profit, right? So I'm sort of I'm kind of the bare minimum for me for a true single family office, probably 50 million.
And a question loosely came in. I'm going to restructure it a little bit. And you and I have had some of this discussion a little bit offline. The United Arab Emirates, Dubai, has apparently many things that are very attractive. It is a kingdom. So there are nuances that maybe someone who's American and checks and balances and freedom of speech and all that, there is potentially a change or an adjustment, maybe not as much from people coming from different parts of the world. But here's one thing that I'll comment on that you could throw in on top of it. I still think the United Arab Emirates could be very attractive, especially for a non-US citizen, for a variety of reasons, including what we see happening around the world. And if you do have concerns over, well, oops, could the spigot be cut off? You're okay. You got your penthouse, you have some business interests there, but your actual money, if it's at one of the big banks, it's not literally in the vault in that country downstairs in some basement. It is globally diversified. And you should have resources from, I could argue, crypto and stocks and others, and ownership of gold that is kept offshore out of banking systems, even pushing it further. And just because you live in your family offices in Dubai or any country doesn't mean 100% of your literal resources should be domiciled in that country per se. Jimmy, I'll allow you a chance to respond.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things that in the last few years that I'm seeing more and more of, and this doesn't even necessarily involve the UAE specifically. This just involves family office and sort of trust and foundation structures generally. One of the things that I'm seeing more and more of is people setting up parallel structures so that there's always a backup structure, right? So,
Yes.
one of the things that you might see typically is you have two parallel foundations in separate countries. Each one of those foundations owns, let's say, a holding company that owns everything else. So if you ever need to move assets from one to another in a hurry, you're just moving that main holding company over and moving the shares over, right? So one of the things that I'm seeing more and more of, to your point, is diversified structures that are in various jurisdictions in different parts of the world. Obviously, then within those structures, diversified assets and diversified banking in jurisdictions, right? I mean, and so I think diversification is absolutely key.
And we're heading a little bit to the home stretch. If you could give me a couple of more minutes beyond the top of the hour. Who is Dubai not for? Who shows up? What's the kind of person shows up, does the, let's call it the residency, and kind of regrets it?
Look, I think the only people, I mean, I know very few people that have been to Dubai and have said this isn't for me, right? Um, I think usually it's, I think usually it's the very sort of uh, socialist Europeans that, claim that the UAE, some people think that the UAE doesn't, say that they, in their opinion, it doesn't have culture or something like that. But look, I think if you're, one of the people that is very much benefiting from socialism and is sort of tax the rich, and the rich people are evil, then I think probably Dubai is not the place for you, which is fine with me. I don't want those people here anyway.
And how about in Dubai? I'm a family person. I'm thinking about education. How about healthcare? How about social environment? Give me a little bit of context how that would compare to, say, Singapore, London, Switzerland.
So look, I mean, I think the UAE in terms of socially, I mean, for me as an example, having grown up between the U.S. and Austria and a little bit in Germany, whenever people ask me where I'm from, the answer sort of like, well, it's complicated, right? I'm from here, and then I was there, and I think one of the things that I really love about Dubai is anybody that you talk to in Dubai has that same story, right? Like they've all done a little bit of traveling and moving around and multiple citizenships, and had very interesting lives. And so I think socially in Dubai, you know, everybody really wants to meet new people and make new friends. And I think that the people here are very, very open to meeting new people and to socializing. In terms of medical care, I mean, look, I think we have the Mayo Clinic here in Dubai. We have the Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi. I think we have very, top-notch medical services here. In terms of education, I think that you have very good universities. You have very good private elementary and high schools and things like that. I think a lot of people, even people from here, oftentimes still go abroad for education. I think, the US and the UK and Switzerland are still probably for university, probably the top places in the world. But you do have very, very good education here, all the way from kindergarten through university. And I mean, especially elementary school and high school, you have very, very good schools. So I think, everything that you need. I think it's easy to make friends. You have good medical care. You have great education. Um, I think it gives you everything you need.
When I look at things from a global and tax perspective, the OECD, the BEPS framework, a CRS, common reporting standard, talk of a global minimum tax, how much pressure is actually on Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, to kind of conform to how things are adapting ex the US, but in most Western countries? Or is the UAE pretty politically insulated?
Look, I think the UAE, I think, has very intelligent governance, and I think that they do things smartly. I mean, look, they are a signatory to CRS. They
True.
are, obviously a signatory to FATCA. They've instituted, they're a member of the global minimum tax thing. So, they're complying with all the international standards that need to be complied with. I mean, because the problem is if you don't comply with them, you get locked out of the banking system, you get gray listed, you know, and so the UAE is definitely taking part in all of these things, but by the same token, also doing things very intelligently. And I mean, look, even if we think of something like CRS, for example, um, CRS is only a problem if you're trying to do something shady, right? If like CRS is only a problem if you're really living in Germany, but you have an account in the UAE and it's getting reported back to Germany because you're hiding income here, right? But if you're a tax resident of the UAE and you're living here and there's CRS, the accounts are getting reported back to the UAE. I mean, there's no problem, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of all this transparency stuff because I just don't think it does any good. Like, I don't think there's any less money laundering today than there was 10 years ago. Um, So I think that most of this transparency stuff creates a lot of more work and expense that's unnecessary. But look, the UAE is fully compliant. It's not on any gray lists or black lists. And they're not trying to be, the tax haven that's sort of, for lack of a better word, siphoning off the rest of the world's taxes, right? They're trying to be just the most attractive place for business and wealth within the international framework.
Strangely enough, for havens, including things owned discreetly for non-US international citizens that don't want to be a US citizen or green card holder, the US is actually attractive relative to certain structures, what states, and the fact that for now, we do not, the US is not a part of the CRS, the Common Reporting Standards. Maybe a couple of really quick final questions.
So just one quick point on that. I actually wrote an article for Bloomberg about that a couple of years ago, about the US is really like the black hole for anybody who's not American, right?
Yes. This might even be simply a yes or no question. We'll try to keep the final relatively quick. Is the backlash, we hinted at this earlier, is the backlash against wealth actually a backlash against competence? Are successful people effectively being punished for simply being good at what they do?
If we have a few minutes, I'm going to give an answer that might take a couple minutes, because I actually have a strong opinion on this. You alluded to something, or not alluded, you said earlier that you've had successes in your life, you've had failures in your life, but you've always been persistent and kept going, right? And I think one of the things that's very much changed, because I'm very much the same way, right? And as a kid, I never looked at somebody who was wealthier than I, or had the nice car, or whatever, and was jealous of them. If anything, it was a lot of respect. And I thought to myself, man, I got to work harder. I got to work smarter.
Exactly.
I got to do this better to get this done. And I really think that one of the worst things that's happened to our world society has been social media. And I think I think that the social media that shows how how the wealthy are living and all of this, which most of it is all fake anyway, right? I mean, most of the people that are posting, flying on a private jet, they just happen to walk by one on an airport and take a picture of them, and they've never even been in a private jet, right? But I think that this overt display of wealth online has sort of changed the dynamic from, hey, I got to work hard to get that, and it's going to take me a while to do it, to this instant gratification of, I got to get rich now, and being jealous of these wealthy people, which makes them obviously much easier to attack and vilify, especially when the governments can say, hey, listen, you don't have the life that you want, because these greedy wealthy people aren't paying for it. And the truth of the matter is, I don't know one uber successful person that hasn't gone through extreme sacrifice to get where they were, whether it's health, family, weekends, overworking, whatever it is. I don't know any wealthy person that hasn't, I mean, other than they inherited it, I don't know anyone that hasn't sacrificed for it. And I think you have I think you have a lot of people that want to work 9 to 5 and spend the weekends with their family. And then the government comes in and tells you, oh, but you could have a much better life if these wealthy people would just pay their fair share.
You said it better than I could. 5 years from now, is Dubai the #1 destination for global wealth, or does somewhere else that we don't even see emerge?
Look, I would say, in my opinion, as I sit now, it's Dubai, right? I mean, I even know wealthy. I mean, you have to think of Switzerland has often been a haven for the wealthy, right? And I even know Swiss people that are moving to Dubai, right? When the Swiss people are like, man, I can't take this here in Switzerland anymore. This is just, they're going nuts. I mean, then really something's up. Look, like I said, I've been here going on 11 years, and I've just seen them improve and make the right decisions, even when crisis has hit, like COVID. I mean, they just navigated it so intelligently, and I just don't see anybody. I don't. There's no other country on the radar that I see right now that that's going to catch up to them at this point.
You've been in Dubai for about a decade. Knowing what you know now, would you have moved there even sooner?
Yes.
Well, that's quite a good way to end. Jimmy, one, it was great to have you on. For my audience that would like to learn more about following you on social, about your international tax services and work that you're doing, and we were really focused on United Arab Emirates and Dubai, but really it's globally. How could people learn more about you?
So the best way is on my website, esquiregroup.com, or look me up on LinkedIn, Jimmy Sexton, LL.M. That's my only social.
Okay, that is pretty simple. So is that the best way to reach out? Do you have a website, a blog, anything like that, or an email you wanted to pass out?
Yep, you can certainly email us at info@esquiregroup.com. You can visit us on the web at esquiregroup.com or shoot me a message over LinkedIn.
And everyone, I'm Angelo Robles at Family Office across most socials, including YouTube. My members for my membership group, it's SFO Continuity. Very active year. I mentioned that 700-page handbook on sovereign risk. For my members, that is coming out soon. They already got my 700 plus pages on creating a top 1% family office, my 850 questions in my family office playbook. And as Jimmy referenced, but wasn't really a big part or tiny part of our discussion today, AI. So my work on 10 things that family offices could do right now in AI. And I updated that in early February because it's been 3 months and oh my God, has so much changed. It's an exciting yet a scary time. For those of you that would like to learn more, follow me across my socials. Go to my website, angelorobles.com. Consider becoming a member of my SFO Continuity for those of you that are qualified. And I look forward to being of service and providing value. Well, I haven't lost power or Wi-Fi yet. I probably have a couple of solos that I'll be shooting, maybe doing live today, a little bit later today if you're watching this live on a Monday. I may do them outside and get bundled up. I do enjoy the beauty of the snow, and the Four Seasons is a charm to me, but I do miss a little sunshine as well. But I will be in Palm Beach hosting my marquee event for my members. The week of March 16th, I'll be there all week, programming over most of that week. And again, if you're a member, you get a lot of access, a lot of peer-to-peer connectivity, and a lot of incredible speakers from around the world coming to talk at my program for about 50 to 55 single family offices in beautiful Palm Beach in March. So everyone, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. Some very good questions today came in. Sorry I cannot get to all of them. And Jimmy Sexton, thanks for being such a great guest. I look forward to our future communications.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Do it again anytime.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, everyone.